Now I'd like to welcome to the show my good friend and my distinguished colleague, Ryan Young, senior economist at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Welcome to Free the Economy. Welcome back to Free the Economy, Ryan.
Thanks, Richard. How's it going?
Oh, good. Happy to induct you into the distinguished and venerable two-time guest club here at Free the Economy. So we have seen a lot of economic policy at the national level recently that CEI and you personally have taken some issue with. The White House tariff regime that has rolled out over the past couple of weeks, for example, I certainly consider to be a major unforced error that should be corrected. And so let's consider a few ideas here that have been put forward that we think are mistakes, not necessarily, and they don't have to be ones that are from the current administration of the past few months. They could be some that are slightly older, but uh, some things that some good ideas that policymakers in Washington, D.C. could adopt instead to actually fix or improve the problems that they think they're fixing with their bad ideas.
Job number
So,
one is restoring the separation of powers. All of these tariffs, and this is a first in US economic history, are coming from the executive branch. The previous two rounds of tariffs of this caliber, the Smoot-Hawley tariffs from the 1930s during the Great Depression, and what is now called the Tariff of Abominations from 1828, those at least came from Congress. And the reason for that is that the Constitution gives all taxing power to Congress and none to the executive. Starting actually with that 1930 Smoot-Hawley tariff bill, Congress started to delegate away bits and pieces of that taxing authority for tariffs to the president. And then that was expanded in 1962, 1964, and also in 1977. Those provisions were until now never before used to increase tariffs, only to lower them, or in the case of the 1977 Emergency Powers Bill, never used at all for tariffs. That's changed. The executive has taken those and run with them, and he's not going to stop. So it's up to the other two branches, Congress and the courts, to rediscover the separation of powers and bring those back. All right, the founders had one big idea for this country. It's this: don't put too much power in one place. I think that's something that we need to discover. It should be a bipartisan cause. Executive abuse of power is more than about just tariff authority or about trade. It's about all sorts of issues, and both parties have produced presidents who have been guilty of enormous sins as far as arrogating executive power. And reining back Trump's tariff authority, I think, would be an excellent start in a bigger cause.
yes, I know people like our old friend Gene Healy over at the Cato Institute have written about the growth of the imperial presidency over time. So I, you know,
Actually, I have Gene's book right here, Cult of the
oh,
Presidency.
and there it is. We're holding it up right there. Um, so I wonder when it comes specifically to those delegations of tariff authority, obviously there's two big possibilities. Congress could in you know go into session and pass a new bill and say we're taking back that power to impose tariffs unilaterally from the executive branch. But also, like you said, there's a potential, judicial solution, which is the Supreme Court could rule that it was inappropriate for Congress to have delegated that power in the first place. What do you think? What do you think the sort of how does it play out with those two options? I don't know. I don't know how much of a, a live possibility those are. Are we getting high on our own hopium here? Where do we think it's going to go?
We are going to find out one way or the other. The fastest way would be for Congress to act. And in fact, a bill has already been introduced with bipartisan sponsorship in both the House and the Senate. I don't see that bill passing just yet, and that would only take back some tariffing authority. But I think what we're seeing here is a conflict between, at least among congressional Republicans, the desire to follow their party's president versus their desire to keep their jobs past the upcoming midterm election.
Mhm.
Um, Financial markets have already let us know what they think of the president's tariffs. We're finding that public opinion is already putting the president underwater, especially on the economy, which coming into the election was his strength. That's what got him elected. It wasn't all that weird culture war stuff. It was that prices were high, So voters punished whoever was in power. They didn't know the nuances of that, but if you're in power and you get higher and rising prices, you will get punished. That's going to happen to Republicans because, like you said, with these tariffs being an unforced error and the president loudly proclaiming that they are his project, Republicans are going to get punished for that. But the question is, as servile and as spineless as they have been, that can only continue for so long. At some point, they're going to have to listen to their constituents and act to rein in either by reducing tariffs themselves or better, by reining in the president's tariff authority in the first place to future proof these tariff abuses. Something has to give. Over in the courts, that's going to take some time, but I'm hopeful for two reasons, and that is because of recent court cases that had to do with the major questions doctrine. These tariffs certainly qualify as they are the largest tax increase since at least 1968 during the Vietnam War, and it's during peacetime. And also the non-delegation question. Um, can Congress actually delegate taxing authority on this massive scale to the executive branch? I think the answer is no, and I hope that courts will agree. The problem is that the wheels of justice are very slow, and a case might take a year or probably even longer, might not even happen before the midterm elections. So between Congress's self-preservation instinct and recent court precedents opening up new challenges, in the long run, I'm hopeful. In the short term, there is only pain.
Okay. We're going to have to steel ourselves for that. Though that will be more difficult because there are tariffs on steel. Um, so when it comes to like the big picture argument for or against tariffs in general, so the most often heard rationale, if I feel like these days with the current administration for high tariffs against imported goods is that U.S. manufacturing is in decline, specifically because of unfair international trade policies. Other countries haven't been fair to us, so that's unfairly hurt our domestic manufacturing. And a new tariff regime will supposedly reinvigorate this manufacturing sector and create more manufacturing jobs. So first, is that initial premise correct? Second, would tariffs fix that problem? And third, what other options should we be looking at?
Ah, the short answers are manufacturing's healthy, trade isn't to blame anyway, and the alternative possibilities involve free trade, deregulation, and economic freedom writ large. We've spent a good deal of time here at CEI busting the myth that manufacturing is in decline. And it's gotten so bad where it's to the point where if someone on the Fox News or some other cable channel starts spouting about how America has deindustrialized and the manufacturing sector is in decline, I take that as proof that they either have never looked at the data or they're lying on purpose. Either way, they come off poorly. So we've been on a campaign to try to right that. If you look at the data, and you can go to the St. Louis Fed's FRED database, you can go to Our World in Data. There are all kinds of data sources you can look at. How much stuff are Americans making? How much are factories putting out? When it reached that all-time high, it wasn't in the 1950s, when the big three automakers ruled the world. Manufacturing employment peaked in 1979 with 19.6 million workers. Output didn't peak then either. When output peaked, it was September of 2018. Basically, right now, right before President Trump instituted his first round of China tariffs, that's when manufacturing output hit its all-time high. It took a dent from those tariffs. It took another dent from the pandemic. And since then, it's been recovering slightly until about now, when the next tariffs are going to cause further harm. But productivity is through the roof. Output is near all-time highs. Manufacturing capacity is actually at an all-time high right now in 2025. A lot of people don't know that, including cable TV hosts with partisan axes to grind. But it's right there in the data. You can look it up inside of 5 minutes. It's all right there. America has not deindustrialized. And in fact, since we're doing that with fewer workers, that 19.6 million workers in 1979 is closer to 12.6 million or so workers today. Fewer workers are making more stuff, which means that 7 million people's time and talents are now freed up from tedious assembly line jobs, and they can start their own businesses. They can work in an air-conditioned office instead in a service sector job. whatever they want. They are freed from the factory lines and they can do what they want now. I think that's fantastic. It's on the scale, it's not quite on the scale of the move from the farm to the factory that happened 200 years ago, but it's the same process, just another iteration. And that's better. So we don't have manufacturing or service sector output. We have all that manufacturing output and the service sector output. Things are more abundant now. People are wealthier by almost any measure. I think that's fantastic.
So Ryan, that's a great description of how, even though we have fewer people working in manufacturing, they are producing more stuff, and that is obviously a net positive for everyone. But some people will still say, we still need more manufacturing jobs, we still need more jobs, we still need more blue collar jobs, and that our all of our economic policy should be dedicated to doing that. But I feel like a lot of those people aren't willing to stop and consider like, well, what kind of jobs do you think we should have, and how, what should motivate a person to be hired for a new job? Should it be economic policy, or should it be actually producing value for willing buyers? Because as our old friend and mentor Fred Smith liked to say, the point is not to maximize jobs. You could just assign people a job tomorrow, digging holes and filling it back up, and that wouldn't help anyone. That would just be basically welfare at best, a welfare program at best. And the same thing is true of I believe it was Milton Friedman, who said, he was looking at a modern construction site, and someone said, "Oh, well, it's too bad that all these big heavy construction machines have replaced the guys who used to be digging these holes with shovels, right? Because all the guys with shovels are out of work now." And he said, "Well, why stop there? Why not give them spoons and have everyone dig the construction site that way, right? You'd have more jobs." But that would be a ludicrous premise. No one is seriously suggesting that, but it seems like in the mania to say, well, we need more manufacturing jobs, and that's always good no matter what the other balance is in the economy, is basically a slightly less crazy version of Milton Friedman's suggestion that we dig every construction site with spoons. We want greater efficiency. So is there a way to communicate that? Is there a way to say like job number go up isn't automatically better for everyone?
Yeah, there are two ways. The first is like that Milton Friedman story you said that cuts to the core. Another way is that um, how many jobs do people have? Since NAFTA passed in the mid 90s, the United States labor force has grown by well over 30 million people. Unemployment is, I believe, currently 4.2%, which is still good. This may change in the coming months. But for now, unemployment is good. Anything under 5% is considered essentially full employment. 4.2% is fantastic. We have that 4.2% despite a 7 million person fall in manufacturing employment because those service jobs are there. When this country was founded, 9 out of 10 people were farmers. It took 9 farmers to feed one doctor or one merchant or one founding father. And now one farmer can feed 60 people. It's about 1.5% of the economy works in agriculture. And yet people still have jobs, and yet everyone's living standard is way higher than it was at any point in the 17 or the 1800s. It's fantastic. It's not how many jobs there are, it's how much value those jobs are creating. And as far as people who point to trade as an engine of job destruction, they have a point there. But any argument they make against trade on those grounds, they need to make, according to studies, 6 times as strongly against technology and automation. For every job displaced by trade, and that does happen, at least 6 jobs are displaced by new technologies, changing consumer tastes, and other forces that have nothing to do with trade. So even if they have the right idea, we can see that for the sake of argument, they still have the wrong target. It's not trade, it's technology. You have to oppose technology. And I don't think a lot of people will do that because, at least instinctively, they get that point that you and I are making about productivity and efficiency as opposed to just having jobs for the sake of jobs. Make work bias is no good.
Yeah, and so I think economists have always acknowledged that any kind of dynamic market economy, any economy that's growing and changing at all, you'll see a lot of churn, and you'll see change in demand for certain kinds of production and certain kinds of jobs. Anyone who has a specialized skill set faces the possibility that demand for those skills will decline as society changes, as technology changes, as the economy changes. And through no fault, no particular fault of their own, they might end up out of a job, right? Because we don't use linotype machines anymore, right? And so all the old linotype machinists are not finding a lot of highly paid work. And so because of that, right, this is not a new debate, obviously. For decades, governments around the world, including the US, have funded retraining programs, right? This is like one of the big promises when NAFTA was negotiated. It said like, well, if this causes changes in demand for certain kinds of workers, we'll have these like programs to retrain people, right? So you take the old skills that aren't in demand anymore and give them a chance to build some new skills that are. But ironically, it seems to me, even some of these programs are unpopular with the same critics who today say we need like trade tariffs, for example. So, look at like Senator Marco Rubio. He's not working on domestic economic policy so much because he's now Secretary of State. But when he was a senator from Florida for many years, he was a big proponent of talking about this sort of like populist nationalist view of economic policy, and we need to like prop up working class, particularly working class male workers. And when people would say, well, workers can get retrained. He said it was disrespectful and insulting to tell an unemployed blue collar worker that he should go back to school, that he should learn to code, that he should get a job in the new economy. But isn't that what we should want? I would just wonder if you have a view about this, where on the one hand, we have people who complain about uh, non-college workers who lose their jobs because of changes in manufacturing technology. But then when you offer them the opportunity to do, say, reskill, they seem to think that that's some sort of insult.
I think it's because a lot of people approach the issue not with so much with their heads, but with their hearts, which is also the same way I like to approach the issue. I love the efficiency arguments, I love the economic arguments, but really it is about making people better off, finding ways for people to cooperate and get along with each other. As far as people on the other side of the trade debate, people like Rubio and people like Robert Lighthizer have, at least the honest ones, have conceded the economic arguments. Yeah, trade barriers will dent our standard of living a little bit, but it's worth it because essentially a worker's dignity argument. They think that manufacturing jobs are more dignified, that they're more secure, especially for non-college educated males. So how do you counter that argument? I would counter it by going into any room full of people, even in the Rust Belt, and asking people for a show of hands. Raise your hand if you want your children and your grandchildren to grow up to work on a factory floor. Is that what you want your kids to do? You will not get very many hands. That by itself, I think, is sufficient to defeat the workers' dignity argument. And as far as retraining programs, they do sound nice. And it's as far as the list of policies I'd oppose, it's far down in the queue, but that's not because of the programs themselves. It's because they would be captured essentially by special interests as well as general governmental incompetence. When you get out of the way, like our mentor Fred Smith used to say, you don't have to teach grass to grow, but you do have to take the rocks off. Instead of trade adjustment assistance or retraining programs, it would be better to take the rocks off of the economic lawn and have equality and permission for people to have a go at finding what they want to do in life. There's so many barriers to that, from occupational licensing to, take your pick of the $2.1 trillion worth of federal regulations. There's a better way.
You know, when we saw some of the big Wall Street downturns the past couple of weeks, losses on major market indices, Dow Jones, S&P, over the past few weeks, and a lot of people were kind of upset about that. They had looked at their 401ks, but we had comments back from people like Treasury Secretary Bessent, and other people associated with the administration saying, oh, well, yes, there's been some decline in the stock market, but that's a Wall Street issue. We're more worried about Main Street, right? And so they've created this distinction in the economy, say, Wall Street is just financial stuff. It's just digital ones and zeros, and it's all big money, billionaires and investors. Those are the people that care about that stuff. We care about Main Street and small businesses and working class jobs. And that's going to be doing fine, right? The Wall Street bigwigs will take a hit, but Joe Sixpack or 12 pack, depending on your preference, he'll be fine, and he'll be helped actually by our current policy. Um, how do you respond to that?
Several ways. One is that it's the small businesses who will be hurt the most by tariffs because they don't have resources or economies of scale they can rely on. Two, if you go after big businesses, which are always a popular punching bag, who do big businesses serve? Who is a bigger company with a bigger market cap? Cartier Diamonds or Walmart? How did Walmart get big? Because it helps regular people. And when you ding their merchandise with tariffs and raise their costs, they pass those costs on to their customers, regular people. And then who owns Walmart? It's a publicly traded company. People like you and me and all of your listeners do because it's in their retirement funds. So when Walmart's share price gets dinged by tariffs, you're dinging regular people's retirement accounts. The Main Street Wall Street dichotomy is false. But if you want to keep it up anyway, just for the sake of rhetoric, you're hurting Main Street more than Wall Street. You're hurting people who can't afford to pay more for their kids' back to school clothes or for a new laptop to replace their old one that their kid needs or for their kids' college fund or their retirement. You're hurting people with tariffs. It's a self-sabotaging policy, and I think it's about time, with the evidence in, to try something else.
Yeah, and we've seen it's interesting. We've seen complaints about some very more specific things, like specific commodities, like ships, for example. We talk about shipbuilding, Navy ships, and container ships. This is something that's been talked more and more about by economic policy people. Part of it is military readiness and things like that, but also part of it is just global commerce and where obviously, seagoing ships, big container ships have a big part with our modern trade system, although maybe less than before if we have really high tariffs. But picking at like that commodity of ships, um, people in the administration, people pundits have been saying, look at these Chinese shipyards. They're building thousands, hundreds of ships or thousands of ships a year in various places in China on the coast. But U.S. maritime manufacturing is very small. We build very few ships here. Um, this would seem to be an irony because we have had a law for over 100 years in this country whose explicit goal was to protect and encourage uh, in a sort of nationalist, non free trade way, shipbuilding in the United States, what's known as the Jones Act. Um, if protectionist policies were successful and the route to flourishing, shouldn't the United States have the biggest, most amazing, most spectacular, beautiful shipbuilding industry in the world?
We should, but for that Jones Act. And I think that is an excellent capsule example of the larger principles of trade and what's holding America back. The Jones Act, like you said, was passed in 1920. It's essentially a Buy American bill for maritime shipping. If a ship is going to service two American ports, say Houston to New York, that ship has to be American built, American owned, American crewed. Only then can it go from one US port to another US port. And it also has severe restrictions for ship building to the point where it has, as you said, destroyed America's shipbuilding industry. Short of aerial bombardment, I don't think you could devise something more effective to destroy an entire industry. Most shipyards rely only on government contracting work because between the Jones Act restrictions and other regulations, to build an American flagged oil tanker or cargo ship, it would cost between 3 and 5 times as much as what it would take to build it almost anywhere else. 3 to 5 times, not 3 to 5%. That prices Americans out of the shipbuilding market. Out of more than 7,000 cargo ships and oil tankers in the world, 92 are Jones Act compliant. 92. It's astounding the amount of self-sabotage that we can do. And it sticks around because the maritime lobby enjoys this quiet, cozy existence. They have no competition. They don't have to worry about profit and loss to the same extent that more free market industries do. They like it, so they lobby to keep it. And because it's easier for that small business to organize, than for 300 plus million people around the country who are each hurt a little bit by those policies to descend on Washington. The policy stays. That's why it's something so clearly bad has stayed on for 115 years and counting. Um, Now you take that small capsule example and apply that to what's going on with the tariffs and with the lobbying frenzy that is about to ensue with exemptions being offered and withdrawn. And I think you have a recipe for every industry deciding to focus on politics instead of on making better products. That's going to slow growth, if not shrink the economy entirely. And like I said, in the long run, although I am optimistic, in the short run, only pain. Like Fred Smith, I'm a despairing optimist on this one.
Yeah, certainly one argument is that if we do want to see any of those political pushback on tariff authority, there probably will have to be more pain between now and when we see that actually end up happening. Uh, even free trade sympathetic Republicans on Capitol Hill don't seem ready to move yet, but we might see some more economic carnage, to quote President Trump's first inaugural address, might be the motive we need. So one other thing that has been mentioned, but maybe has been like insufficiently explored, is that the administration, especially Navarro, has said that it's not just about tariffs, right? Because we had this reciprocal tariff idea, which isn't really reciprocal, but the idea is like if you put a tariff on us, we put a tariff on you with some other country, and that's if not the best, always the best policy, is at least intuitive. You kind of understand there's a certain parity, like, well, we'll match you tariff for tariff if that's what you're going to do. Um, but there are also what's called non-tariff barriers to trade, right? And so, there's one recent interview where someone pointed out, well, there are countries that have essentially no tariffs on U.S. goods, and they got slapped with reciprocal tariffs from the minimum 10% or 10% up on the so-called Liberation Day announcement of tariffs. What's up with that, right? How can you defend that? And he said, oh well, those other countries have non-tariff barriers to trade, and so we need to go after that stuff too, not just the formal tariffs for when we try and export to them. And so there's something to that, right? There is such a thing as a non-tariff barrier to trade, and the World Trade Organization, for example, their procedure for adjudicating disputes and things takes acknowledges that. But I feel like that's also kind of a get out of having to make your argument free card, right? Where you can blame almost any economic policy of another country and say, well, this policy, even though it's ostensibly focused on some other topic, might eventually have some way that it hurts our imports. So that's a non-tariff trade. So we have to slap tariffs on them without actually trying to get them to change that specific thing, right? Because it's a lot easier just to say, oh, we're going to up your tariff rather than engage in a sort of like long, complicated negotiation over some other country's domestic economic policy to have them change it. On top of which, there's plenty of things the U.S. does, which would be considered non-tariff barriers to trade, right? We massively subsidize things in this country with government support. For example, the subsidies of the Inflation Reduction Act, right? Those themselves could be considered non-tariff barrier to trade by other countries trying to sell us the stuff that's being subsidized. Uh, and I don't hear anyone volunteering to back off of our own policies in that regard. So, I wonder what you think about these non-tariff barriers. Uh, you know, should we have a policy that's more closely focused on that? Also, isn't that what the WTO is supposed to be for? The WTO like resolution process is supposed to be for in the first place, and we don't seem to be engaging with them at all.
Yeah, it is something for the WTO, but unfortunately, one of the servile caucus in the Republican Party has introduced a bill in Congress to withdraw the U.S. from the WTO. And there's plenty I would change over there, but I still think it's a valuable avenue because we have an 85% win rate in their dispute resolution process for exactly the kind of barriers, tariff and non-tariff, that you're talking about. And you're right that there is a coherent logic to countering their tariffs with our tariffs and to countering their non-tariff barriers maybe with tariffs of our own if it works to get people to the negotiating table. We found that that strategy does not work. We found that out in Trump's first term when he enacted China tariffs, in part for that reason, also for trade deficits. That's a separate story. Beijing didn't make any reforms. They retaliated. So one day after Beijing retaliated, the US started round two. Beijing didn't reform. They retaliated. This went on for 4 rounds during Trump's first term. We're now up to, gosh, I actually lost count. It's either round eight or round nine. 9 rounds. That has gotten us up to 145% tariffs across the board, although maybe now with some exemptions on electronics, but maybe not, and we'll see in 90 days. Beijing still hasn't made any substantive reforms. They've only retaliated. So we know that the retaliation tactic does not work. One thing I've been telling anyone who will listen is that when it comes to a trade war, the only way to win is not to play. It's like that old Matthew Broderick movie, War Games. As a 17-year-old, he knew more about economics than people working in the White House. And I think that is a very sad commentary.
And so, as we're talking about these various scenarios, you know, we have a theoretically real problem. We're currently seeing bad solutions for it, but if we really wanted to solve the problem, we could do other things. Also, sort of ask, in the back of my head as I was thinking about these questions before we started talking, that also presupposes a question zero, which is, should we be consciously prioritizing XYZ thing in the first place? Is the point of our policy making, should it be, well, we want to favor this sector of the economy, we want to favor this particular demographic group, we want to favor this particular industry, and therefore, what are the best, most efficient policies for doing that? Well, we could probably come up with the least bad policies for creating favoritism for those particular groups, right? But should we be doing that in the first place, right? Or should we be saying, well, we should, to the greatest extent possible, let supply and demand meet in the market. If we've got a dispute with another country's policies, we should do the best thing we can, which is go through the WTO process and see if we can, you know, get a positive ruling and get other countries to reform. But the point of like this country, especially when any economy-wide policy is going to affect everyone and possibly their affect their employment, affect their 401k, affect their ability to retire and send their kids to college. Maybe we shouldn't be saying, well, the whole point of the economy should be making sure that 18 to 30-year-old white males without a college degree get the best possible factory job. Maybe we should just want a growing economy in general. Is that can we can we teach our ostensible antagonists in the economic policy world that lesson?
Trying to do. The economy is not about any single purpose, especially one decided from Washington for others. The point of the economy is what Adam Smith said, to allow every person to live their own life in their own way. That's what the purpose is. It's not to appease ethanol farmers in Iowa, or these days their equivalent, the steel workers in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, or Youngstown, Ohio. There are only 80,000 people in the entire steel industry. Add in aluminum, which has also gotten similar treatment, and you're talking about 150,000 people out of a country of 340 million. We're talking about less than 1/2 of 1% of the population. In order to support them, we are disrupting the entire economy to the tune of eroding, what, $6 trillion in value in financial markets. Even Trump's first term steel and aluminum tariffs, which were pretty modest, to save or create one job in the steel or aluminum industry, depending on whose numbers you believed, it cost from $600,000 to $900,000 for each job. And these aren't jobs that paid $600,000 or $900,000 jobs. They're jobs that paid maybe $50,000 or $60,000 a year. And they're the kind of noisy, dangerous, drudgerous, repetitive assembly line jobs that people have been trying to move out of for as long as they can. Again, go back to that room, show of hands, who wants to work in a factory? People are voting with their feet to not work in those factories and to escape those kinds of jobs. So for people in Washington who've probably never been inside a factory in an entire life, to re-engineer the entire $28 trillion US economy to benefit those 150,000 people, and even then, not really benefit them, is it's a moral crime.
All right. Well, I think that's all the summary we need. Um, Ryan, thank you so much for talking through all this stuff with us. And it is my pleasure to have you on here for a second time, but also to as your colleague to see your emails and your Slack messages as we as we try and navigate our way through this turbulent 21st century of economic policy. Before we go, tell people where they should find your work online.
Well, CEI.org is the obvious place. I'm also on Twitter. I'm not going to call it X. Nobody calls it X. I live near Chicago, where the tallest building around here is the Sears Tower. I know it says something else on the front of it these days. Everyone still calls it the Sears Tower. I still call it Twitter. Reg of the day on that website. It's regulation for or reg for regulation, reg of the day. So you can find me there, cei.org. I'm on Blue Sky, although I forget my handle there, but I'm around. Come reach out. Always happy to talk. And Richard, thank you for having me on.
All right. Thanks again, Ryan.